Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we have this little knife. This is the Benchmade Bugout 535. Similar in design, in size to the 531, which was a Purdue design, but I do actually like it just a little bit better. Now, I will say this knife is generally too small for me. This is just a little over a 3-inch blade, and the whole knife is only about 7.5 inches. I'll give you the specs in a second here, but you know, to me that's just a little bit too small. But there were a couple of things that attracted me to this and prompted me to pick one up. Number one, it's got an interesting shape and design, and I really liked the 531 Purdue, and so I really wanted to try this. Just because it put me in mind of it so much, but seemed like it had made some improvements. And I really do believe that it has. The other thing is the weight. 1.86 ounces is ridiculous. So I really wanted to get a sense for, has Benchmade really given me a good, useful tool at that extremely low weight? And the very simple answer is they have. They've done a great job with this knife. A couple of the little things. I really like the color. I like the blade shape. I like the small clip. And that's something else I really wanted to try out. And I'm thinking it's interchangeable with Benchmade's other models, which is really cool because you can see the 3-screw pattern right there that we're used to seeing on Benchmade. So that means that clip will fit most Benchmades, which is going to be really awesome. Now that you kind of, let's go ahead and start talking about the actual size, weight, specs, features that are going to be important for you to know about. Okay, first off, size and weight. And of course, this is the big deal. This knife is specifically designed to be extremely lightweight and yet also very capable. And that's a hard balance to achieve. It's pretty easy to make a knife that's, you know, big and heavy duty and will get a lot of work done. But to get a knife that will do quite a bit of work and still be extremely lightweight and easy to carry, that's a bit more of a challenge. And I've got to say, they've done a pretty good job here. Now, I say pretty good because honestly, I think you could have gotten away with an 8-inch knife here, 3.5-inch blade, you know, 4.5-inch handle. And, you know, it would be something that I would be raving about instead of just pretty pleased with. So 7 7/16 overall on the length here. Okay, so just under 7.5 ounces. 3.25-inch blade. In fact, it's just under 3.25 inches, but not much. And the handle here is 4.25 inches. So very small package when it's closed. Okay, you've only got 4.25 inches to deal with. It's very slim, well under 1/2 inch. You know, maybe just a little over 1/4 inch, in fact. And of course, that 1.86 ounces is unnoticeable. Like, you literally don't know that you have this with you at all, which is really nice. And the way I've used this a number of different ways, but it makes a great backup blade if you're carrying something bigger and heavier. It also makes a great knife to wear around the house. A lot of times, like probably many of you, I'll sort of kick back and relax in the evening, and I may throw a pair of workout pants on or even a pair of like pajama style pants, and you can still carry this knife in those pants and be very comfortable, and that I think is really nice. The other thing is I'm occasionally a runner, and this knife works extremely well for that as well. You can pop this in a pair of running shorts and you don't even know that you've got it. In fact, it's so light, I would say, guys, that, you know, if you had the right kind of lanyard where it was detachable, you could pretty well use this as a neck knife, right? Put a lanyard through here and have this hang around your neck without any difficulty. It's that lightweight. So I think that is a real win on this part of this knife, and they've really gotten it down to such a lightweight while still being big enough. Now, is it big enough for me? Not really, okay? I would really want this knife to be, you know, as I said, at least an extra 1/2 inch of blade or so. But as it stands, it's not bad, okay? Let's put it this way, for a small knife, and you guys know my bias, I definitely like larger knives, but for a small knife, this is good, okay? Let's say it that way. Now, one of the things that makes it so good is the blade. Okay, this is a very thin blade, thinly ground, nice and thin behind the edge, S30V steel drop point with, now Benchmade calls this satin finish. It's almost, you know, I'm going to call it the Benchmade Stonewash. See if you can get it. There you go. You can see there, it's kind of a satin finish, but you can definitely see that they've treated it. They've put a stone wash of some kind on it, just a light one. Nice thin grind, and that's one of the things that Benchmade has sometimes struggled with. So I'm pretty pleased to see a nice thin, a nice even grind on this blade, and the choil is done right. Now Benchmade doesn't normally gets that right, so I'm not too worried about that. In terms of the actual usefulness of this blade, yeah, very, very good. It slices like crazy, and it will do a lot. I was really impressed, and I feel like a broken record here. I've watched a few other people's reviews of this knife in the meantime. A lot of guys got reviews out really quick. I tend to take my time a little bit more. But I have to say that this knife has held up extremely well. And I will say, in hand, it feels like it might be a little bit light duty, and you're sort of like, I don't know how much this knife will take, and I don't want to, you know, I'm going to be a little bit careful with it. And you almost can't help doing that because it's so lightweight. But the reality is this knife will hold up pretty well to regular EDC type of uses. And I would not hesitate, you know, if someone were to say to me, hey, I really need a lightweight EDC. Maybe I wear dress pants every day or something like that. You know, this would be a suitable everyday carry knife, I think, for probably 80% of people. There would be the odd person who would need something a little more durable. You know, and even then, you could, I'm sure Benchmade would argue, you know, this is as durable as you could want, and it probably is. So, blade is very, very well done, extremely useful, a nearly perfect EDC blade. It is kind of thin, but think about, you know, there are lots of knives that have a pretty thin blade, and I always say you shouldn't be prying or putting torsional forces on your blade anyway. So in that regard, it's not that big of a deal that it's quite thin. So there you go, guys. I think the blade on this is really good, except for it's just a little bit too short. How about lockup and deployment? Well, it's an axis lock, guys, and axis locks are pretty good. They do have, and from time to time, I still hear a story about an axis lock with the Omega springs breaking. It's never happened to me, and I knock on wood. This is plastic, but whatever. Knock on wood. It's never happened to me, but I know it can happen. There is a potential for failure there, and that is kind of frustrating, especially because Benchmade isn't too willing to send those springs out. That said, they are pretty good about their warranty, and so you can always send it back if you do have an issue with those Omega springs failing on you. And I get that they do fail, and there are a few of you out there with stories about them failing, and so we need to kind of keep that in the back of our minds. In terms of smoothness, in terms of fun factor, you know, how easy is it to play with, it's actually really nice. Now, I will say the first couple of days it wasn't as amazing as it is now. Now it flicks like most Benchmades. It just took a little bit of time to get there. On camera, I'm having a bit of a hard time with it, but generally, you know, if I'm, you know, sitting watching TV or something like that, this knife works just fine. But it did take a little bit of time to work in. Now, it did have very, very slight side-to-side blade play, and so I tightened the pivot just a little bit, and that did mess up the centering. Now, it's not rubbing or anything like that, but the centering is a little bit off. You can see I can't spider flick it there. The centering is a little bit off. It's not rubbing. And for me, for a knife like this, that's not a big deal. As long as it's not rubbing, I'd rather have it off a little bit off center, but have no blade play than bring some of that blade play back to get it in the center where, you know, you like it to be. So yeah, action is quite good. You know, it's become at least as good as most any Benchmade. The one thing I will say is, you know, the knife is a little tough to use in the way where you release the axis lock, and that's just because the blade is so small and light. Like, in order to get a knife to flick closed, you need a certain amount of weight there, and this blade just doesn't have it. Okay, so a lot of small light Benchmades. The 531 Purdue was similar feeling to this one. By the way, I'm talking about, you know, this being maybe not the best knife to flick and being the centering be a little bit off. I recently had a comment where the commenter said, you know, you knife reviewers can always find something to complain about. And I want to just respond by saying that's kind of our job, okay? You know, do I care that the knife is a little bit off center? No, I don't care at all. I still think it's a great knife. And totally enjoy it. However, I know there'll be some viewers who care. So as a reviewer, in order to do my job properly, I've got to mention that. Okay, so that's kind of how the whole review game works. You've got to be a little bit nitpicky, and maybe I'm not nitpicky enough all the time, but I try my best, okay? Let's see, moving on to the handle. The handle here is Grivery, which is essentially a reinforced polymer. Not my favorite choice. I definitely think this should have been G10, but for some reason, when Benchmade works in G10, they like to charge a lot of money for it, even though, you know, you can buy, you know, here's a knife with a G10 handle that's like $30, right? So it doesn't make a lot of sense, but Benchmade definitely does that. Drives me a little bit crazy, but there it is. So yes, I will go on record as saying I wish this knife were G10. I wish a lot of Benchmades were G10, and that they didn't feel the need to double the price when they do make them out of G10. I'm being a little bit facetious there. Okay, I know they don't really double the price. But anyway, very lightweight, very comfortable, more comfortable than I anticipated, and definitely more comfortable than some of the 530, the 531. They're not as well done in hand as this. And I've had the 531 and I've messed around with the 530 a fair bit. This is really comfortable. It's grippy enough for anything that I want to do, so I definitely have no complaints about that. The jimping here on the back spine are sort of recessed jimping, and it doesn't do a whole lot. So those are my, you know, ergonomic points. Not bad. It's a small knife, so, you know, it's not going to be as comfortable as some things could be, but I can get 4 fingers on this without any difficulty. It's just not very hand-filling, which, you know, is not the end of the world, but isn't my favorite thing either. Let's see, what do we want to still talk? Oh wait, I'm missing a major point on the handle. The lanyard hole is not what I'm talking about, but since we're looking at it, there's the lanyard hole. It's quite big, fine lanyard hole. The big thing is this clip, and I've got to say, I love this clip. It's small, it's deep carry, it's pretty springy so that it holds onto your pocket pretty well, which I think is important with a knife that's this lightweight. And best of all, this clip is in the same standard 3-screw configuration that Benchmade does on all their knives. So you could order one, and you could get one from Benchmade for any number of knives. You know, your Griptilian or your Proxy or your Crooked River or whatever else, okay? And I think that is really, really awesome. And I definitely can see in my future a Benchmade Crooked River with this clip on it. Without a doubt, that would be really, really cool. So overall, the handle I think is fine. It's definitely lightweight. It doesn't feel like super strong. It's not like a cold steel, and there is a little bit of flex here. You can see it's not the end of the world. And as I said before, lots of people have tested this out and found that it's pretty tough. So you can't really say too much other than, you know, mentally, you know, it feels a little, maybe a little weak, a little overly, what would you say? That flex is a little off-putting when you're using the knife, okay? In terms of recommendations, I think if you really love this knife and you know, or you think, I'd love something close to this size and this function, I think a 940 would probably be your best bet. But of course, this knife is really good as well. Outside of that, I don't have a lot of knives that are very much like this, but I'll bring in a couple. I've got this guy from Rake Knives. This is the 831, whoops, let's put it on the camera, 831 SF. Really nice knife, and it's small as well. A little more blade length, very different, of course, in design, and it's not as light as the Bugout, but it is kind of smaller. Since it's here visiting for another video, here's the Real Steel G3 Puko. Again, a fairly small knife, about 7.5 inches. What else have I got that's a little smaller? So the steel well cut jack is fairly lightweight, fairly small. You can see the cutting edge is not that different. There's a little bit more on the cut jack. It's definitely more ergonomic and feels much more substantial in hand. But again, some similarities here, right? You've got the Grivery handle, you've got D2 steel, which is not going to be quite as good as S30V, but pretty darn good. And this is a liner lock instead of the axis lock. And it is heavier, it's not as light. And nothing here, guys, is going to be as light. Let's see, if you want something that's fairly small, fairly light and easy to carry, but can really take a beating, here is the Cold Steel American Lawman. Absolutely great knife, nearly perfect as an everyday carry knife. Thinking of nearly perfect as an everyday carry knife, last but not least, let's bring in a Paramilitary 2. And so you can see, again, the Para 2 is not something I really consider a big knife, but you can see this is a fairly small knife. Okay, those are the comparisons I've got for you. Now let me give you my overall take on this fairly well done knife from Benchmade. You know, I think the design is good. I think the bright color is good. The blade shape is excellent. The weight on this is absolutely incredible. My biggest issue with this knife is I wish it were a full-size knife. I wish this were the same size as the Griptilian, but just made to be slim and light. And if it was, like, this would be mind-bogglingly good. You know, Benchmade, if you ever watch this video, please make one of these with a 3.5-inch blade that's just a little bit bigger. I would absolutely be in love with it immediately. So that would be sort of a dream. Maybe for next year, Benchmade, please make that. Otherwise, though, this is a great knife, guys. It's so easy to carry. It's super slim. It's very well built. The action is eventually good. As I say, it took a little bit of time to break in, but that's pretty common for Benchmades. The centering is off, but again, that's pretty common for Benchmades. And I did, you know, I adjusted the pivot, and that's what put the centering off the way it is. When you could loosen it off, and if you're willing to tolerate a little bit of side-to-side play, which I'm not, you could have it pretty well perfectly centered. Okay, so yeah, I think this is a great knife. Total win for Benchmade. If you like 3-inch knives, I think this is amazing for you, and I think this will be really popular. It's, you know, I really don't have a lot of negative to say about it. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and we will talk to you soon.